Hi guys, welcome back aboard good old Athena for yet more DIY fun. Go ahead and come aboard. This week I am going to be replacing this manual winch here on the cabin top with a Selden E40i electric winch. Also, hopefully a little bit later this week, the tackle for our new rod kicker is going to show up so we can finish that. On Ava's to-do list for this week is the jerry can covers and also a sunshade for the cockpit. My name is Mess, this is my wife Ava. I've spent the last 5 years on a somewhat extensive refit of our 1987 Warrior 38 named Athena. That was a DIY fun-packed adventure complete with a very extensive osmosis treatment, building a new rudder using vacuum infusion, rebuilding the entire deck, gutting and subsequently rebuilding most of the interior, painting the top sides, and a ton of other projects. The summer of 2021 we started cruising full time. Now we're finally ready to begin our adventure. Let's jump right in. This is the E40i electric winch from Selden. This is quite a unique product for multiple reasons. The most important one for us is that we're going to be able to mount this somewhere where we would not be able to mount any other electric winch that I'm familiar with. The thing that really caught my eye about the E40i is the fact that the motor is integrated into the winch. There is no gearbox and no motor protruding out the bottom of the winch. The reason I'm so excited about that is because that will allow us to mount the electric winch up here on the cabin top where that manual winch was, without losing any precious headroom in our aft cabin. As you can see on top of the box, the integrated motor inside of the winch runs at 42 volts. That is awesome news because that means the gauge of cable that goes up to the winch is going to be relatively tiny, which means it's going to be a lot easier to find room for it up underneath the headliner, and it's also going to be a lot easier to get that cable to conform to any kind of bends compared to if the motor had been running at 12 or even 24 volts. It's worth noting that there is one important feature about these winches that I'm not going to touch on in this video, and that's the fact that they can communicate over a bus. I believe Selden calls it the SEL or cell bus, and that means you can run these winches synchronized, but seeing as we only have one winch, we don't really have anything to synchronize with, but it's a really cool concept. I believe everything we need to get started with the installation should be included in these 3 boxes here. There's the winch itself, then there is the controller pack, which I believe contains the MCU or motor control unit, and then we have a PSU starter pack for 24 volts. Here is all the contents for those 3 boxes. Now inside this first white box here is the MCU or motor control unit, and then in this box over here is the PSU or power supply unit. This drawing in the manual neatly illustrates the relationship between the boxes. So on this boat there is a single PSU, but there are multiple MCUs because each motor needs its own motor control unit. All the MCUs and the PSU get connected up to the communication bus, the cell bus, and so do the control buttons. There are 2 buttons included in the kit. Those get connected up using this cell bus converter box, and I believe this box will actually allow us to hook up a second set of buttons. So we could have the first set of buttons near the winch, and then we could have another set of buttons near the helm station if we wanted to. In preparation of the installation, I've already read through both of the manuals, but before we can get to actually install the winch, there's something else we need to take care of. Like I've mentioned, we're going to be installing the winch up here on our cabin top, but that cabin top is made up of a sandwich construction. In our case, that sandwich is made out of balsa wood sandwiched in between 2 layers of fiberglass. That's a good, stiff, lightweight construction. The issue here is that balsa wood is pretty easy to compress. It's common practice that whenever you're through bolting something through a balsa core that requires a lot of clamping down, then you remove a section of the balsa core and replace it with something that's not as easily compressible. That could be plywood, it could be solid fiberglass. There are multiple good options. I removed the manual winch and used the included mounting template to line up the mounting of the E40i. I just so happen to have a giant hole saw that is bigger than the base of the E40i, so I decided to use that to cut through the bottom fiberglass skin and the core. An oscillating multi-tool would also have been a good option. After having removed the balsa core with a chisel, I prepped the surface both inside the hole and along the edges. Using West Systems 105 and 406, I mixed up a little bit of thickened epoxy and applied a generous amount to the new plywood core. Then it was just a matter of smushing the new core in place and cleaning up the squeeze out. The final step was to cut out fiberglass circles starting at roughly the size of the hole, making them bigger and bigger up to about hole diameter plus 20 centimeters. For any kind of smaller patches, especially when working overhead, I like to wet out the fiberglass before smushing it in place. It's easier and it makes less of a mess. It's the next day and our epoxy up here has cured nicely, so now we can move ahead with the E40i installation. Now Selden has included this mounting template, which I absolutely love. It makes installing the winch a lot easier. I wish every manufacturer of anything for a boat did this. The line with the heaviest load we've got up here is the gray one. That's the outhaul for our mainsail. So that is the one I want to make sure has the least amount of deflection from the clutch. So let's see if we can get this lined up again. The E40i is definitely going to be the centerpiece of our cockpit, but let's go ahead and get this guy bolted in place. As per usual, I'll use just a tiny bit of butyl tape to seal around the fasteners. Having bolted the E40i to the cabin top and also reassembled it, it's looking mighty spiffy out there. In terms of mounting stuff out in the cockpit, there's only one more thing we need to do, and that is to install the buttons. The E40i comes with two buttons, number 1 and number 2. With these two buttons you can do 3 different speeds, but we'll get back to that later. Mounting the buttons was super simple, just a couple of quick big holes with a hole saw and a couple of minor holes for the screws, and that was it. After I had the buttons in place, I took the 2 boxes, the PSU and the MCU, and just quickly mounted them inside of our locker here in the aft cabin. I've got the 3 cables that come out of the winch run inside of this conduit all the way down to our 2 boxes. At some point when I get to put the finishing touches on Athena, I'm gonna have to build a little box up here to hide the wiring that goes to our C-Zone digital switching panel. While I'm building that box, I might as well make it big enough to hide this cell bus converter box for the buttons. This is what takes the presses for the buttons and throws it out on the bus. So it'd be nice to have this, somewhere near the buttons. With the 24-volt version of the winch comes this 60-amp circuit breaker. This is the last thing we need to figure out where to mount, and then we can start running some cables. And with one fell swoop, that is 95% of the wiring taken care of. All we have to do now is to connect up the bus and also the buttons. The purple cables that come with the winch are for the bus. Now, this is not compatible with the NMEA 2000 network you may have on your boat, so don't just connect these up to that. These need to be on their own bus, but it works just like an NMEA 2000 network. You have these T's and of course some terminators. Getting the cables to the buttons is going to be a breeze, and they came with these little spade connectors, so connecting everything should be super easy. The manual says to connect to pin 3 and 4 on the switches, so that is what we'll do. I'm going to hold off a few seconds on doing the last little bit of cable management until I've seen the buttons work. The text on them is pretty small and I just want to make sure I got everything connected to the right pins. But yeah, let's get some juice applied, and then I think there's a little bit of programming involved. No giant sparks. I'll take that as a good sign. I've got 2 green LEDs on the MCU and the PSU and a single red LED on the button box. And I think that means we need to configure the buttons. That was the tiny bit of programming I mentioned. On the MCU, way in there is a little button we need to depress. Once that is done, then we can program the buttons. I believe we should see the LED change color as soon as we hit this. So let's try it. Perfect. And then we simply just press and hold either one of the two buttons. There we go. This is freaking awesome. So there are 3 speeds. There is slow, which is fairly slow. Then there is medium, which is pretty fast. And then there is what our friend Dominic from Sailing Kadoa has nicknamed ludicrous mode. I don't really foresee us ever needing this amount of speed, but yeah, that is pretty freaking fast. There is something that's worth taking into consideration before you install an E40i, and that is the fact that there is no way to hook up a manual winch handle to the E40i. It is electric only. So in case you ever run out of juice or the winch dies or for whatever reason, it's good to have a backup. And for us, that backup is simply just to loop the line around the E40 and then over to this manual winch. Now, unfortunately, the outhaul for our mainsail is a little bit on the short side for the winch, but I think this will work. Let's give it a go. There we have it, unfurling our mainsail without breaking a sweat. Furling and unfurling our mainsail has never been easier. Of course, it's not really the full-fledged synchronized experience that, for instance, Ran Sailing have. In their new mast, they have the whole synchronized thing, which is super awesome. But yeah, for us, this is going to be a huge help. Before we jump to the next topic in this video, I want to say a great big thank you to Selden for sponsoring us this amazing E40i, but also to our YouTube friends aboard Kadoa. They did an installation of their E40i last week, and Dominic is a great storyteller. It is well worth checking out. We'll include a link for their video down in the description.
After waiting for what seemed like an eternity, our canvas finally came in and I was able to get started making our jerry can covers. We fiddled around with the template for a very long time and then we found the perfect fit for us. It has a nice snug fit, it has a little flap with some Velcro and reinforcement around the handle. You'll also notice there's a little space here between the Velcro and in the back seam, and that is for a strap that's going to hold the jerry cans down on deck, but we'll get more into that later. The canvas we end up going with is an alternative to Sunbrella. It's about half the cost and it's a lot easier to get right now, but so far we really like it. It's 100% acrylic and it's 100% waterproof. Along with the canvas, we also got this PVC material. We used it here to reinforce around the handle. We got this idea from a Sailrite video where they were making dinghy chaps, but it actually worked out really well here. And this is 100% waterproof PVC and it goes through the Sailrite like butter. The thread we're using is UV resistant, it's also mold, mildew, and salt resistant, and it's 100% waterproof. So yeah, it's a pretty good thread for this application. It's probably going to outlast the canvas, and it's probably going to outlast us. Here are the templates we made. Figuring out exactly how we wanted them was probably the most difficult part, but once you have that figured out, it's pretty simple. After you just plop them down, trace them, and cut them out. We tried a couple fabric marking tools. I really like this one. It comes with little extra pieces of chalk inserts here. This is still the first one that I put in, but what I really like about this is that you can sharpen the tip and have a really nice, sharp, clean edge. Also, I like the chalk because if you make a mistake, you can just erase it like this. Once everything's traced, now we got to get it cut out, and for that we need our handy dandy hot knife. We are using this angle. It is the HSG0. I have a love-hate relationship with this thing. I love it because it makes cutting through canvas really easy, but the smoke it creates is not ideal. But we have a system for that. Whenever we're using the hot knife, we open up this hatch up here and put a box fan in the companionway to help create a nice smoke stream to get all the fumes out. And also, while I'm going along, I gently blow the smoke out of my face. Someone also mentioned that if you hold and release the trigger in intervals, you can kind of regulate the temperature of the knife and it's not as smoky, which that's true it is. It's just trying to focus on holding and releasing while following a straight line is a little tricky for me right now. I know it's easier for Mads, and maybe it's just something I need to get better with in time. We also have our sacrificial sheet pan here. We just put it under the canvas so we don't burn through the countertop. With everything cut out, now it's time to start the assembly. And first we're going to sew the reinforcement on, and I like to do that by doing a zigzag stitch around the inner edge and a straight stitch around the outer edge. Next we're going to start on the flap, and we have to sew a seam around 3 sides. 2 long sides, 1 short side, and I use these clips to help mark a 1 centimeter seam allowance, and again, especially for canvas, these little clips are awesome. Now to sew the flap onto the main body, I put some basting tape on the right side of the flap. Now I'm going to put right sides together, and you're going to center it between your reinforcement and just give, you don't need a lot of space at the top here, but push it down, and then you're going to sew in these spaces. Remember, we're leaving this spot open. So sew here and sew here. And don't forget to stop at this line. I can't tell you how many times when I was making all the other ones, I was just like, oh, got so excited, went all the way and was like, damn it, and had to go back and rip out the seam. Now fold this guy over and just make sure it looks nice and even on the side here, and then fold that down, and we're gonna sew here again. I just like to make little marks so I remember not to go all the way through. So sew here and sew here. Now it's time to sew the Velcro onto the body, and I just cut 2 pieces about 7.5 centimeters each and made sure they were within the bounds of our flap right here. And we have 2 pieces with this separation because this is the hook side of the Velcro, and we don't want that chafing the webbing that's going to be going through here. Now we're going to figure out where to put the loop side of the Velcro, and this can be 1 long piece because it's soft and it won't chafe the webbing. And so to figure out where it's going to go to account for the curvature of the jerry can, I'm going to place this just a little bit lower, and what I do is just put it halfway between the hook side. I peel off the bias tape, and then I place that down, and it'll stick to it, and I'll know where to sew it. Now it's time for the final assembly, and what I think is the trickiest part of the whole thing. You're going to sew the sides onto the body, and you do that by putting like sides together, and you're going to start at the bottom and go all the way around the top. The straight part is, well, straightforward and easy. It's around the curve where things start to get tricky, and my only suggestion is going slow and make very tiny adjustments. Okay, now we gotta flip it right side out. All right, there she blows. Now all that's left to do is sew a 4 centimeter hem all around the bottom. And now she's done, and time for test fit. Uh-oh, suits off. Beautiful! All 5 jerry cans are done, and they are looking very spiffy. To secure the jerry cans to the deck, we installed these 2 stainless steel tubes. Those are attached to the stanchions, and the jerry cans are held in place with this webbing. To release the jerry cans, all we have to do is lift up this flap and undo the buckle. The webbing does a really good job of securing them on deck, but when we're offshore, we're going to use one of these stainless steel ratchety things to hold them in place. I am really happy with how these turned out. I love them. I think they make the deck look really clean, and the design is really functional.
So this week we finished the winch installation. Ava did all of the jerry can covers. We also did work on our sunshade a little bit. It didn't really turn out that great, so we're going to order some more material and give it another go. But yeah, that is going to be it for this week's video. In terms of next week, Ava's going to be putting some leather wrap on our steering wheel and our hand grips. They're going to look amazing. I'm going to be working on a preventer and also the running rigging for our rod kicker. And that's going to be the end of this week's video. We hope to see all of you guys back here aboard Athena next week for yet more DIY fun. As always, feel free to leave a comment down below, and don't forget, if you've enjoyed this video,
please remember to leave a like.
See you!